Hi.
Hello. We're back in Listening to the Giants by Warren Wiersbe, and wanted to mention a few of the authors that I got to know, not just through our book business, but by the biographical information that Wiersbe and some others shared with us. Bite-sized, usually 4 or 5 pages of biography. As we said in the prior segment, there's 13 bios in here with a sample of the preaching or the style of each of these authors directly from their books.
Right.
And that's very helpful if you're just trying to figure out whether you'll like them.
Yeah, because everyone has their own taste as to what appeals to them. So we haven't always read the same books or had the same, maybe we've read the same books, we haven't always had the same strength of feeling about the different people.
Or reactions, or we haven't found them particularly usable, but some are usable for one thing, i.e. scholarly discussion with people who have doubts about the faith, but some are very usable just as devotional reading, some to warm your spirit. And Meyer, the ones you mentioned last time, like Meyer and Ironside and Drummond, are particularly good at that.
And I was always looking for something that I could use with my Sunday school students or with Max, and but you would be using things that we were having Bible studies with people, or having a bunch of Christians over, or dealing with individuals that had particular questions. So we always had a variety of needs.
So because I was teaching an adult class and you were teaching children most of the time, we definitely had to look for different sources. And so because I was diving into Bible books, let's say Acts, or the epistles of Paul, or the Old Testament Genesis, I needed different resources, and I got them by using this book specifically for its resource list, which we'll get to in a little while. But before that, 4 of the guys that hit me hardest when I was just getting my feet wet in Christianity, we've mentioned J.B. Lightfoot a lot. I don't think I have to spend time on him again. Just to say that the 4 in this book that are brought together by Wiersbe, 3 of them are Anglican, what would be called Church of England over home in Britain, but would be called Episcopalian, by the way, in America. 3 of these guys are Anglican. Richard Trench, first of all. Wow. He was a great New Testament scholar, wrote specific books on the parables and the miracles, among other things. Really in-depth books. These are not for the beginner, but they're very, very nourishing. But you have to chew a lot. And
he would just give me little tidbits once in a while.
Trench is very quotable for one reason, just beyond his scholarship. He's a master of the English prose style. Why? He's also not just a great New Testament Greek scholar, but one of the main men in the putting together of the original Oxford Dictionary. Whoa. And so he's one of the greatest linguists on the planet 100 years ago, 130 years ago during the reign of Victoria. So when he writes a book, he writes. And you can love the writing, but the scholarship is unbelievable. The depth of scholarship. And he became another bishop, this time in Northern Ireland. So Trench, Anglican. Lightfoot, we've talked about, one of the, maybe the greatest New Testament scholar of his day in the English-speaking world. Also a bishop at the end of his life. Then there's a 3rd Anglican here, W.H. Griffith Thomas, who is actually more conservative than the other 2. The other 2 are conservative, but this man could be called, by today's standards, a fundamentalist. And if he'd lived a little longer, he might have been the first president of Dallas Theological Seminary. But he died just before Dallas Theological Seminary, which is now the most influential seminary in the world, was founded. So Griffith Thomas, by the way, taught right here in Toronto at Wycliffe College of the University of Toronto. Wonderful writer.
I do remember using him quite often, so I think he has that warmth and practicality.
He does. He's approachable by anybody. Writes, although he's a great scholar and theologian, he writes at the popular level most of the time. And then there's one who's not an Anglican in here, and his name is John Henry Jowett. He lived from 1864 to 1923, so he's almost an exact contemporary of Joseph Rutherford. Didn't live too long, though, as you can see, only 59 years. He was so famous as a preacher in his day, along with people like, well, I guess you could say, you mentioned Moody in the last one. Moody, McLaren, a Baptist again, Spurgeon, another Baptist.
Yeah, great preachers.
Jowett was Congregational.
Yeah.
But he was so famous as a preacher in England that the most famous Presbyterian church in New York City, Fifth Avenue Presbyterian, brought him over to be their preacher for the World War I period.
Wow.
And they say he overworked himself and consequently died an early death. But I've read a lot of his stuff, and he's just an amazing thinker as well as analyst, and he tends to preach through Bible books too, much of the time. So I would say if you want a book that would spur your interest in books, not only this one, Listening to the Giants, but Walking with the Giants, which is another book Wiersbe put out actually before this one, would be a good place to start. Not just as sampler for the styles and the substance of great preaching of the past. Most of the people that are dealt with in these books, like I said, are contemporaries of, well, Russell Rutherford and Nathan Knorr. It's very interesting to contrast the substance, not just the style of the writing. And the emphases, because one of the things that we have to say is that most of these guys, with a significant exception of Ironside, who tends to be, because of his brethren background, writing about prophetic books and prophetic subjects a lot. Most of these guys, though, keep away from prophecy, almost religiously. And we need to make that point over and over again, because a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses seem to have the impression that, well, yes, it's true, we make mistakes and we get far out on the theological limb sometimes in speculation, but so does everybody else. That's not true. These writers are famous for not going there.
So I think because they don't go there, they're more practical in your day-to-day walk with God, being Christ-like. It means that you're going to be able to not be devoting your energies in a field that is speculation. You know, you're going to be devoting your energies in doing things that are going to be practical for people around you too. You're going to be concentrating on your own walk with God rather than on what's going to happen and how's it going to happen. And it takes us away from doing what we should be doing.
One of the most famous books of this collection that came to my attention through Wiersbe's work is maybe Griffith Thomas's most famous book. It's called Christianity is Christ. And that just about says the emphasis of not just Thomas, but all of these guys. Their emphasis is upon Christ and how Christ's influence, Christ's Spirit, can be seen in us. It's not about what's going to happen next. The emphasis is very much on what Christ did, which was often foretold in the Old Testament, of course. What Christ did and how it applies to our life now. Not about the future. The rest of the book, by the way, he has, like I said, 100 pages on books called Classic Books for the Preacher, including chapters on preaching on the miracles, preaching on the parables, sermon series of books, books of quotations, a thesaurus, so he's very much, by the way, into words as well, just like John Henry Jowett and Richard Trenchware, anthologies of preachers, that is, a bunch of preachers in the same book. He has a chapter on that. And then he has 40 pages on the basic library, and I can't tell you how much that chapter blessed me. Well, I can. I spent a year or two just assimilating the stuff he was saying for my own and your use, but also to recommend to others. In a future video, we wanted to concentrate on his other book, his collection of samples from some of the other great preachers we met through Warren Wiersbe and other bibliophiles that we met very early in our Christian walk. Walking with the Giants was the first book that he wrote, and then Listening to the Giants was the second, and there were further collections that followed those too.
I think there's one that kind of combines them too.
Giant Steps, is it called?
Giant Steps. Yeah, I think so.
For a future segment though.